British Isles were converted from paganism to Christianity in the 7th century. The brothers Cedd and Chad played a key role in bringing the faith from Northumbria to the other kingdoms of these isles. England was not yet a country at this time. Cedd and Chad were raised as children in the holy monastery of Lindisfarne, Northumbria, by St. Aidan. Their other two biological brothers, Cinnabil and Caelan, were also raised by St. Aidan. All four brothers went on to become priests. Their names are Celtic, and it seems they were of noble birth. As we discussed in our video on St. Cuthbert, Lindisfarne Monastery was established by St. Aidan, who had come from Iona, a small island in modern-day Scotland. Iona Monastery had been established by St. Columba of Ireland in 563. In 653, the Northumbrian king St. Oswiu sent Cedd and 3 other priests to the kingdom of Mercia, the area of Britain we now call the Midlands. How did this happen, given that only 12 years before, the pagan king of Mercia, Penda, had slaughtered Oswiu's brother, St. Oswald? It was all thanks to Penda's son, Peada, who was a sub-king governing the part of Mercia inhabited by the Middle Angles. In 653, Peada went to Northumbria to ask for the hand of Oswiu's daughter, Alcfled, in marriage. Oswiu consented on the condition that Peada be baptized. Peada received instruction in the faith and was so moved he declared that he would become a Christian even if he could not marry Alcfled. So, Peada returned to his kingdom with his bride and 4 priests. Thus began the conversion of Mercia. King Penda did not convert, but he respected those Christians who lived true to their faith, and did not object to the mission. 2 years later, Oswiu killed Penda in battle, and Peada took over as king of Mercia, under Oswiu's overall control. Although St. Cedd started the work of evangelizing the Midlands, he did not stay there long. Later, in 653, he was sent to the kingdom of the East Saxons, from where its modern name Essex derives. The pagan king there, Sigbert, often visited his friend King Oswiu in Northumbria, where the two would discuss religion. Slowly, Oswiu convinced Sigbert of the truth of the Christian faith, and he accepted baptism. St. Bede tells us that Bishop Finan of Lindisfarne baptized him at a village called On the Wall, meaning a Roman wall, about 12 miles from the east coast. This is just west of Newcastle upon Tyne, near to the current village of Heddon on the Wall. So, St. Cedd accompanied King Sigbert back to his kingdom and carried on his missionary work there. There had been a Christian mission here before. In 597, St. Augustine had arrived from Rome and appointed one Bishop Mellitus. However, paganism was still very strong there, and Mellitus was driven out in 614, so Christianity never took root. It seems Cedd was more successful, and Christianity thrived in the kingdom. After some time he returned to see Bishop Finan of Lindisfarne, who was so pleased with his work he appointed him Bishop of the East Saxons. So Cedd returned, ordaining many priests and deacons, and building several churches. One was at Tilbury, near the mouth of the Thames, and one was at Bradwell-on-Sea. Remarkably, this church still stands, and has been in use ever since. It is the oldest church in Britain, and well worth a visit. It was built from the stones of the Roman fort which had been there. Like all true prophets, St. Cedd was not afraid to stand up to those in power. A certain nobleman had made an illicit marriage, so Cedd excommunicated him and forbade Christians from entering his house. King Sigbert ignored the ruling and kept visiting the noble. One day Cedd saw him leaving the man's house, and prophesied that he would die a violent death in that very house. So it came to pass that the king was murdered there. When the assassins were asked why they killed the king, they said it was because he was too lenient. Cedd remarked that God would show mercy on the king, as he had been murdered for showing mercy to others. In 655, St. Cedd was called back north. Northumbria was composed of two parts, the north being called Bernicia and the south Deira. The king of Deira, Ethelwald, was a brother of Oswiu and ruled under him. Ethelwald invited Cedd to found a monastery there. Cedd chose a remote spot in the hills, which Bede remarks was more suitable for wild beasts. To purify the site, he undertook a 40-day fast during Lent, taking only a little food in the evenings, apart from Sundays. He explained that this was the tradition of those who had taught him, to seek God's favour by prayer and fasting while building a new church or monastery. Amazingly, the crypt of the present church in Lastingham is thought to be the very church in which Cedd celebrated. Another church well worth a visit. In 664, Cedd acted as a translator at the Synod of Whitby, located, like Lastingham, in modern-day Yorkshire. The synod was called by King Oswiu to decide the correct way to calculate the date of Easter, the Irish way or the Roman way. At the close of the synod, King Oswiu ruled that the Roman way should be followed. The issue is part of a wider divergence between the Irish or Celtic tradition and that of Rome. The Celtic monks placed a great deal of emphasis on fasting and personal poverty. Bishops from that tradition, such as Aidan, Colman and Cedd, set an example by living a modest life. They owned no property and gave most of the money which was donated to them to the poor. They preferred walking to going by horse. Like Christ, they spent much of their time in remote places, preaching to the poor. Rome's representative at Whitby, St. Wilfrid, by contrast, lived the life of a lord, and travelled with a large retinue of servants. Although Whitby ruled against his tradition, St. Cedd accepted the verdict gracefully. Like St. Cuthbert, he placed a great value on unity. Later in that year, on October the 26th, Cedd died of plague. When his beloved spiritual sons in East Saxony heard the news, 30 of them set off immediately to Lastingham. They declared that they wished either to live alongside his body or to be buried with him. God granted their prayer quickly, and all 30 died of the plague, except for one small boy, who went on to become a priest. As St. Bede puts it, he was spared in order that he might provide witness to Cedd's holy life. Cedd's place as abbot of Lastingham was taken by his brother Chad, to whom we shall now turn. As we said, Chad was brought up at Lindisfarne by St. Aidan. He was about 10 years younger than his brother Cedd. He spent time in monasteries in Gaul, modern-day France, and Ireland, which was then a great centre of learning. He was steeped in the ascetic tradition of fasting and poverty. He took over as abbot at Lastingham on the death of his brother, but he did not stay there long. After about a year, King Oswiu had him ordained Bishop of York, then the chief city of the southern part of Northumbria. Meanwhile, Wilfrid, who had represented Rome at the Synod of Whitby, was also being ordained Bishop of York over in Gaul. In 666, Wilfrid returned, claiming to be the rightful Bishop of York, as Chad's ordination had been improper. King Oswiu ruled in Chad's favour, and Wilfrid retired to a monastery in Ripon. However, in 669, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theodore, judged that Wilfrid had the better claim to be Bishop of York. Chad gave way gracefully and returned to Lastingham. He said that he had never wanted to be a bishop and took the role only out of holy obedience. Theodore was so impressed by his humility that he consecrated him bishop himself. By this time, Penda's son, Wulfhere, was king of Mercia. Like his brother, Piada, who we mentioned above, he converted to Christianity and asked for a bishop to be sent to his land. Archbishop Theodore sent Chad. Even as bishop, Chad insisted on walking. He was so reluctant to obey the suggestion to use a horse that the archbishop had to lift him onto one himself before he complied. King Wulfhere donated land for a monastery at Lichfield, near modern-day Birmingham, so Chad founded a monastery there. He built a small house where he lived with 7 brothers. He served as bishop about 2 years before he was called to the Lord. Bede describes the manner of his death. He had been praying alone in the oratory when the monk Owen heard angelic singing coming from the building. After about an hour, Owen heard the singing going upwards. Chad called Owen in and instructed him not to tell anyone about the angels while he was still alive. He told Owen that the angels had informed him they would be back in 7 days to bear him to heaven. Chad gathered the monks and told them his death was at hand. He told them to live in peace and follow the monastic rules faithfully. As he had predicted, St. Chad died 7 days later of the plague, on March 2nd, 672. As Bede says, he prepared for his death by receiving the body and blood of our Lord. His holy soul was released from the prison house of the body, and, one may rightly believe, was taken by the angels to the joys of heaven. Nor is it strange that he regarded death with joy, as the day of the Lord, for he had always been careful to prepare for his coming. He was buried in his cathedral of the Holy Virgin Mary. A stream of pilgrims came to pay their respects, and many healing miracles occurred at the site. In 700, a new church of St. Peter was built, and St. Chad's body was translated there. The current cathedral, dedicated to the Virgin Mary in St. Chad, was built on this site in the 12th century. About 10 minutes' walk from the cathedral is a spring where St. Chad used to baptize. It is in the grounds of the small parish church of St. Chad, which was built on the site of Chad's oratory, from where Owen heard the angels. So, St. Chad's body lay undisturbed for some 800 years, until Henry VIII's so-called Reformation. This involved the destruction of all monasteries in the country, of which there were several hundred. Henry's inspectors seized the land and took all the valuables. Perhaps worst of all, they destroyed all the shrines dedicated to saints and smashed the relics. St. Chad's shrine was destroyed at that time. Until then, there had been an annual pilgrimage to this holy place, but such events were now illegal. The Reformation is the main reason why most of our saints have been forgotten. By the grace of God, St. Chad's relics were preserved. A priest called Arthur Dudley stole them away, and they ended up in a Roman Catholic family, the Hodgetts. When Henry Hodgett was on his deathbed in 1651, the Jesuit priest noticed that he kept praying to St. Chad and asked him why. Henry replied that Chad's relics were at the head of his bed. In 1842, the Roman Catholics built a new cathedral in Birmingham, dedicated to St. Chad. The interior was created by the famous architect Pugin, who designed the interior of the Houses of Parliament. Chad's relics were placed in a casket above the altar, born by angels, just as his soul had been born to heaven by angels. In 1995, the Oxford Archaeological Unit carbon dated the bones to the 7th century. In Lichfield Cathedral there is a wonderful limestone panel depicting the angel Gabriel. It is thought to be part of the box which held St. Chad's relics. The fragments of paint on it have been shown to be the same paint used to write the Lichfield Gospel. So, let us conclude our look at Saints Cedd and St. Chad. Let us give thanks to God for sending us these holy men, who brought the word of Christ to our land. It is essential that we become more familiar with our saints and keep them at the very front of our consciousness. Let us make pilgrimages to the holy places which they sanctified. In our godless age, we need their intercession more than ever. St. Cedd and St. Chad, pray to God for us.